to this episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis, and I'm here with Nina Rosner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connections so you can have a thriving marriage. Today, our topic is what to say when you are the villain in someone's story. Now, I know at Greater Impact, we talk a lot about being the victim and how that just does not work well in relationships. Well, another side of that, or another way of looking at that, is creating a villain in our stories. When we tell stories about ourselves, usually we're the hero or the victim, and then there's got to be someone that plays the villain. And I think that's so interesting because, Proverbs, if you, I don't know which verse and which chapter, but it does tell us the first to tell the story sounds truthful, but then someone else comes behind them and you're not so sure what's true at that point. So let's talk about that. Nina, do you have any experience with being the villain in someone's story?
I have too much experience with that. Oh my word. Like, I don't think you can lead anything without that happening, right? So from a ministry standpoint, and I think that's, probably not something that everybody can relate to, but I do know that in marriages, that is a thing that happens where the one spouse has their story, their truth, and they're blaming. That's what a lot of people do. They blame the other spouse, right? And, who hasn't done that? And so I think my husband and I both have been villains in each other's stories. And I will say that that's absolutely treacherously wrong. Like, it's never truthful. It's never useful. And we're not seeing God's truth in that space. We're following the enemy, both of us, when we do that. And I don't think we do that anywhere near like we have in the past, like decades ago, right? But it's human nature. And I hate it.
Yeah, it's not helpful. And usually it's about being right. We're trying to be the person that is right. And like you said, it's usually not about right or wrong. It's God's truth. So today, what we want our listeners to walk away with is the what to say when you've been assigned the bad guy character in somebody's story. If you don't do this well, you might end up attaching your worth to that opinion or that character or that role. And worth and identity should come from Christ. So we want to make sure you have the what to say and the right perspective around that. So I was having a conversation this week with a family member, and I was the villain. It just happened to work out that way, of course, since we're talking about that this week. And it came out of left field, and I wasn't prepared for playing that role in that story. And I have to say, I didn't handle it well. There was some defensiveness, and this was all over text. It wasn't in person. So it was just me responding via text. And what eventually happened was, I picked up the phone and I realized going back and forth, defending my innocence, wasn't really working well. I was not being reassigned a new character in this story. I was being cast as the villain, and they were not changing their minds. And so I picked up the phone and I just, I listened. I listened and I listened and I listened. And then it finally dawned on me, they just needed to be heard. They just needed to be validated. And I didn't have to agree with the role I was playing, but the least I could do was validate, their side of things. And I think that happens to us a lot. Sometimes it's really just about being heard. And if we don't get that, then the only resolve, the only, way out of it is to just cast people into a bad character. I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, my heart's hurting for you. And then cheering you on when you decide to switch gears and do the right thing. And it's the only thing that works. I had a situation, we have a pretty large family and extended family. And one of the family members insisted that I had done this heinous thing. And I knew I hadn't done it. But my conversation kind of started like yours, right? Where you're like, oh, no, I didn't do that. Like you're getting accused of something, you didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And quickly into that, I realized, oh, this is just escalating. And what was crazy was I in that moment, I wasn't in a good spot. I was exhausted from some other things that were happening. And I was just like, I don't have the skill level to handle this well right now and maintain the relationship. And I just didn't have bandwidth for it. So I said, you know what? I need to put this conversation off. I want to hear what you have to say. I just can't do that right now. And some other people had overheard the conversation and came up to me later and they were like, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. They told us this too. And we're like, there's no way she did that. Like we were there. There's no way. And we tried to talk them out of thinking this way, but they still do. And I'm so sorry you're doing. Like I had 2 different people come up and say basically that to me. And I'm still sitting there going, what am I going to do in this situation? So about 2 or 3 days later, kind of like you, made a phone call. Okay, let's talk, let's meet. And I like to, with stuff like this, I like to put lots of space and then intentionality around it. So if I live with this person, you can't really do that super easily unless saying, hey, is now a good time to talk about XYZ from yesterday? But I set up a time, met them for coffee, and just let them have the floor. And they said all the things they need to say, which I got to tell you, it was super unpleasant, and one of the things the Lord told me in the middle of that conversation, it was just repeated scenes from Jesus's life where he was accused of this and accused of that, the blasphemer, it's like, I'm in good company because I knew I hadn't done this thing.
Right.
And so I just listened and took comfort from the Lord. And I said, so let me see if I get you. Okay. I want to make sure that I've heard everything here. You're feeling da 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 because this happened to you and you saw me as da 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 and that I did da 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 da. And they're like, yes, absolutely. Yes. And I said, you know what? I'm so glad you told me this. This has really been weighing on you. I've wondered why we've been kind of weird together. And so now I know. And they're like, yeah, I've really been struggling with this for months. I'm like, okay, what do you need from me right now? And they're like, well, what do you think about all of this? I said, well, you've given me some things to think about. Honestly, and you're probably not going to like this. I have zero recollection of doing the things that you say I did. And so, I'm having a little bit of a struggle with that because I literally, maybe it's age related, I am 55. I don't know, but I don't remember. And the stuff that I do remember happening, I remember it a different way. So I think I'm going to talk to some other people that were around. But what none of that really, what bothers me is that, is it possible that I did this? Maybe. And then the thing is that, you're upset and our relationship is harmed because of this experience that you've had. And I'm not sure what to do about that. But I'm really glad that you told me, and I hate that you're hurting, so I navigated into the places where I could validate their experience. And do I hate that they're hurting? Absolutely. And then I put some space in there. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I came back and I said, so I've talked to some people that were there for that particular event and some of the other times. And, here's who I talked to. I'd encourage you to visit with them too. And I have a completely different experience than you do. And at the same time, I'm really sad that this is how you're experiencing me.
Right.
And so what I want to do is, figure out, where do we go from here? What do you need from me in this space? I'm really sorry that, I contributed to, the pain that you're going through. And they're like, well, so you don't think you did those things? And I said, well, a lot of what you talked about was my motive around all these things. And I think if you talk to some other people, they might see something different than you do. Right. And I said, I don't remember thinking any of the thoughts you said I was thinking. That's not who I am. And, and I got specific about a few things, and I said, and you said this, and I also had this other piece going on. So I don't know how to reconcile that. So, but what I'm not telling you is that your experience wasn't real and damaging to you. I can see that you're hurting. So I walked this line of, your truth is your truth and it's real to you. And I can hear that and I can accept that. And there were little pieces that I apologized for. And then I also knew I didn't do this thing. And I wasn't going to say that I had. I'm not going to lie. Right. I'm not going to betray myself in that space. But boy, it's like a tightrope, those tightrope walkers at the circus back in the dark ages, with the bars, and you're like, okay, where am I at with this? Because I didn't want to make the relationship worse. And when you deny somebody else's experience, you make the relationship worse. That's the outcome of that. Always.
Wow, that is so good. And that is so true. It is very hard to hold space for someone else's perspective, but also have your own, and be very, very clear in what actually is true. And I think that's where, if you don't have a strong identity, and if you don't know who you are, you can start to believe something that isn't true, which isn't the right direction,
right.
And I think, and honestly, I'll go as far as saying, I think God allows those situations to help strengthen our identity.
Yeah.
And for sure, with my situation, which sounds very similar to yours, it was an opportunity for me to show up very, very solid in who I am. But how often does that go wrong and go bad, and people get defensive? And it can be a mess if you don't know how to do that tightrope walk.
Well, and I think a lot of the reason it goes south is there's some things people don't know, right? Yeah. So one of the big things is that if you can't validate, you're triggered. Are you a Christian man or woman who's done everything you know to do, and yet you're still stuck? Maybe you've lost hope. You feel alone. You're discouraged. Like, I get that. I know. And yet you don't want to rip your family to shreds by divorcing. But you can't just keep dealing with the conflict. It's so bad. Did you know that couples who only learn to do conflict better are still not happy? We'll teach you how to turn conflict into connection, but we'll also show you the other research, the must-haves for your relationship to bring joy and connection to your marriage. Like, if you don't get that piece, the positive inputs, and they're real specific, it won't matter that you can do conflict. Go to greaterimpact.org and sign up for 2.0 Your Marriage today. Stop the pain. Create the relationship you want today.
Ooh, yeah.
If you can't validate, you're triggered. Yeah. And well, what's the triggering? Well, it might be you're prideful, right? Or it might be like you can't hold two truths in your head at the same time. You don't have enough maturity emotionally. Not that I'm some genius there, but I've grown a lot in that. So I know what it's like to not be able to do this. And it's maturity that's made me be able to do it most of the time. I'm not perfect at it by any stretch. But if we can't validate we're triggered. Like that's a thing we have to know. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, we don't think we have options. So we know we're supposed to validate, but we're like, we can't validate because that's a lie. We've decided that's a lie. Like we don't even know that it's okay to have a dialectical thought process happening where their truth is there and there's space for that in the relationship, and your truth is yours and there's space for that in the relationship. And all of that can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can have gravity and airplanes at the same time. Like, come on, y'all. That's
Yeah, no, it's true. Two things can be true at the same time. We can actually both be the hero if we decide to see it that way. But you're right, we don't even think about it that way. And wow. One thing I wanted to ask is, okay, how important is when there's these two different perspectives and you're not seeing it eye to eye, just like your story, how important is it to actually get to the facts? Is that really necessary, or is it okay with agreeing to disagree? Can the relationship live
Mhm.
in
Oh
that
yeah.
place?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've got a couple people that are in my life that I love wildly, that we think so radically different about a couple of things.
Hmm.
And there's a few things we just don't talk about. We try again, and now and again, and it just kind of like, well, I don't really. And then the other person's like, I can't do this. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. I don't mind, but but you have to hold the space, and you
Right.
have to validate their opinion. And years ago, my kids get tired of me saying this, but years ago when Ronald Reagan was president,
Okay.
he, not that, I don't even know what any of his politics are really, but I was like in high school when he was president, but he had such an elegant way of handling things. And one of the things that sealed the presidential debate for him was when he was confronted by Walter Mondale, who was like 15 years younger than he was or something, about his age. And or I guess it wasn't Mondale that confronted him, it was the guy doing the questions in a debate. And he said,
Okay.
you have so much, if you're 15 years older, does that concern you? And he said something, I'm not going to hit it exactly, but he said something so beautiful. He said, I'm not worried about the inexperience and youth of my competitor, or something like that.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. But people that are like that, and he was so good at allowing people to have their opinions and then connecting them. He basically said, I still respect this guy, even though he's got, fewer years of experience than I do. And of course, I think highly of him, or something like that. So it's like, wow, you can see all of it and you're not rattled by any of it. And it's that example I use with couples. It's like, if your spouse comes to you and says, hey, you're a big, fat, ugly, hairy llama, there's nothing in you that's going to be offended or even think that's true or take it personally. You might think, you've lost your mind. Like, what is wrong with you that you think I'm a llama? And we used to be able to have dialogue where somebody else's idea could be, what's that about? That's interesting. Why do you say that? And tell me more, and all of that, and explore ideas with people. But we're just, and I blame Google and the internet and social media because of
Mhm.
algorithms that keep us siloed. So I'm exposed to more and more of the same ideas that I already hold.
Mhm.
Whereas when we were growing up back 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you would get a newspaper with reporting that was, here's what happened.
Right.
And then people would talk about what happened and form their own opinions around it. And journalism was supposed to be unbiased. Well, tell me what newspaper you can read now. And I'm sorry, it's both sides of the aisle in our country. Republican news, Democratic news, they all lie. They're all biased.
Yeah.
I cannot find a news source that is, I mean, even I like Real Clear Politics because they do both stories, but the journalists are, here's my bias and here's my story, and then you read somebody else's, and like you said at the beginning, like, what's true? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And the other thing that's missing is this element of curiosity.
Mm.
We are all different, and that I think is actually a good thing and an opportunity to grow and learn. And that gets lost somehow too,
Mm-hmm.
that if someone is different, they're a threat. And if they have a different opinion, we have to fight against that, when really, you might learn something. we
Yeah.
we can learn from each other. And I wish, I don't know how to bring that back, but you're right, it's lost, and it's getting less and less common.
When I was teaching at a community college here in Cincinnati, my students would have to do persuasive and informative speeches. And it didn't matter what speech they were doing. I had them type in their topic in Google and then write controversy, so that they would get both sides of the issues. Because if you don't actually go out and search that, you're going to get fed what you already think. Well, so then you can't be curious because you don't know that there's another opinion out there. So, and I think that impacts people in their relationships in a big way. We're all so defensive because we're not used to having to be curious and hold space open and not know what we really think about something because we don't have all the information, and try to assimilate that over the course of time. We just type in the topic and here's what happened, and it's biased. Yeah. So we're told what to think. We don't develop the ability to decide what we think through being curious. And we do that with our spouses.
Yeah. Eesh. Yeah. Okay, so taking all of this into consideration, the fact that, information is biased, we have triggers, we're not mature.
Yeah, me too, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of effort that has to be put into showing up well whenever you are made the villain. It is work, but there are some things you can do. And, a few of them are, maybe try putting space. If, you're triggered, be intentional about stepping back and just giving time. Then maybe later set up a time and have that conversation again, come back to it, let them have the floor, validate. And if you're still triggered, get comfort from the Lord. The steps are great. We talk about them all the time. And that's a big step in the steps is to get comfort from the Lord. Also, you can ask what they need. Is there something that they need that hasn't really been communicated? It might not be something you can give them, but at least allow them to express that to you. And I would say the most important thing in this scenario is to know what is true. Know who you are, know your identity in Christ. You don't have to give that up, even though you give them the floor and let them give their side of the story. You can always hold on to what is really true in that situation. So we hope this was helpful to you. We want you to do something with the information that you have today. Nina, if there's one thing that you would leave our listeners with from this conversation, what would that be?
If you are feeling like you are being made out to be the villain, show up as a leader instead and say, tell me more about that. Choose curiosity, choose leadership, choose love. And if you do that, then the person will dump their buckets, and then you'll be able to help them sift through that to what's true. But the only path through that is validation, so that they feel heard. And then they'll trust you enough to hear what it is you have to say about it.
Amen. I love that. Well, if you're interested in going deeper, check out our next episode. We can take you to the next level if you're interested. We also have a website called greaterimpact.org, where you can download a free PDF called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also have some e-courses and coaching you can sign up for if you want to go even further in your walk. Thanks for joining today, and we will see you next time.